the story of the homeless huts in Holland. And today, we get an inside look at the very first finished hut. Pastor Willie Watt is spearheading the project to bring the huts to the homeless in the Holland community. Now, there has been some pushback.
This is a house, 6 feet by 10. Insulated floor, a bed, a storage bin, a small solar-powered light, and a door that locks from the inside. Built out of donated lumber and salvage, it costs between $250 and $500. That's the price of a decent tent. Somebody built the first version of this in 1987. Then this country spent 36 years sending bulldozers instead. Now Seattle is putting public money into building them. San Jose opened 11 sites in a single year. Minneapolis put 100 locking rooms inside an old warehouse. So what changed? The answer starts with something America tore down 1 million of and then made it illegal to rebuild. Eugene, Oregon, 2013. A nonprofit called Community Supported Shelters started assembling small huts on the edge of the city. 2 solid walls stand at the short ends, and a curved metal frame arches over the top like the canvas roof on an old covered wagon, which is where the name comes from. There's a door that locks. There's a window that locks. Inside, there's room to sit upright and take your boots off without the wind finding you. Built from reused and donated materials, the early ones cost between $250 and $500 each. The difference between that and a tent isn't the roof. A tent can't be locked, it can't be insulated, and it can't keep a man's identification, his medication, and his work boots safe while he stands in line for a job. Today, built by paid crews with new lumber, the huts run closer to $3,500 apiece. Volunteers working with salvage still get them far lower. The organization sells a step-by-step build manual, and the design has spread into states across the country and 1 United States territory. A retired carpenter with a circular saw and a free weekend can put one together. That's not a theory, that's happening in church parking lots right now. So why did a country with this much lumber, this much empty land, and this many out-of-work builders leave 65-year-old men sleeping under highway overpasses for a generation? It isn't laziness, and it isn't a shortage of money. What actually happened is worse than either. Go back further. Atlanta, 1987. 2 graduate students in architecture at Georgia Tech, Michael Connor and Brian Finkel, walked into a camp of people living under scrap plywood and asked a simple question. What would you actually need? The answer wasn't complicated. A roof that doesn't leak, room to stand up, a place to sleep that nobody can walk into. So they built it. A plywood box, 6 feet by 8 feet by 6 feet, with a bed, shelves for belongings, and a wood-burning stove vented through a metal pipe. Their crew could raise one in 20 minutes. The first hut cost them about $200, and once they started pulling lumber out of construction site dumpsters, the cost dropped to somewhere between $25 and $40 each. They called themselves the Mad Housers. They put the huts in industrial lots, along rail lines, at the edges of transportation land, sometimes on ground they didn't own, which they never hid. By June of 1989, the Atlanta Parks Department had torn down 2 of them near a residential neighborhood, and the Georgia Department of Transportation had removed another built on access land. The city inspectors were technically correct. The huts violated building codes. No sewer connection, no permitted foundation, no approved egress window. They also kept people from freezing to death. The Mad Housers still exist in Atlanta, and they still give their blueprints away free on their website. But the wave of chapters that sprang up around the country in the late 80s and early 90s is gone. Every single one of them. Pay attention to this next part, because it explains everything else. America used to have a floor under its housing market. It wasn't pretty, and nobody put it on a postcard, but it worked. Small single rooms, usually with a shared bathroom down the hall and sometimes a shared kitchen, sat above storefronts and inside old residential hotels in every city in this country. A dock worker could rent one. So could a discharged soldier. So could a man drinking too much who still showed up to work every morning. A widow whose husband's pension died along with him could take a room, keep her own key, and stay off her daughter's couch. That was ordinary. Her granddaughter has never seen a building like that in her life. If you rented a room like that in your 20s, you already know exactly what I'm describing. Then, it started disappearing. In 1955, New York City banned the construction of new ones outright. Zoning codes across the country were quietly rewritten to discourage anything except detached, single-family houses. Fire codes were tightened in ways that made the old buildings impossible to operate at a low rent, and urban renewal money paid to knock them down, because the land underneath was worth more than the people living on top of it. San Francisco's redevelopment director in that era is remembered for saying more or less out loud that the land was simply too valuable to let poor people sit on. Then came the wrecking balls. A Government Accountability Office report to Congress in 1992 put it plainly. Over the 25 years beginning in 1960, the United States lost about 1 million rooms that housed single individuals. That was roughly half the entire national supply. Chicago alone lost 32,000 rooms between 1973 and 1984. Boston lost close to 90% of its stock between the 1950s and 1985. Picture one of those buildings for a second. 40 rooms over a hardware store, 40 men who each had a key and a rent receipt. Today, it's a parking garage. That happened about 1 million times. And single adults, that same report noted, had by then become the bulk of America's homeless population. Nobody voted for this. There was no bill called the Remove the Bottom Rung Act. It happened one zoning amendment at a time, one fire code revision at a time, one wrecking ball at a time, spread across 4 decades and hundreds of city councils, and by the time anybody connected the dots, the buildings were already gone. Researchers at the Pew Charitable Trusts ran the numbers recently. Adjusted into today's money, those rooms rented for as little as $100 to $300 a month. And if that kind of housing had simply grown at the same rate as the rest of American housing since 1960, this country would have roughly 2.5 million more of them today. That's enough to house every person counted in a recent federal homeless count more than 3 times over. So the man sleeping in a doorway downtown tonight isn't there because America ran out of money. He's there because America demolished the only thing he could afford, and then made it illegal to rebuild. So what did we build instead? Shelters. And anybody who's actually stayed in one can tell you why they were never a real substitute. A congregate shelter is a large room full of beds. You check in at night. You're pushed back out onto the sidewalk in the morning, usually before 8, carrying everything you own on your back. There's no lock and there's no storage. Your medication gets stolen, or your work boots, or your paperwork, and now you can't make the interview. Most of them turn away pets, which means a woman whose dog is the only living thing she trusts will choose the tent every single time. Many separate couples. Many require sobriety at the door, which sounds reasonable until you understand that it filters out the exact people dying outside. A lot of the men in that room served. Their discharge paperwork would move them to the front of a line most of them don't know exists, and it's sitting in a file they can't get to. A man who slept in a room with 60 strangers and lost his identification twice will stop going. Then the city counts him as service-resistant, and a councilman repeats that phrase at a public meeting, and everyone in the room nods. Give that same man a door that locks, and the behavior changes almost immediately. Not because he became a different person, because he finally has something worth protecting and somewhere to leave it. That's the whole insight. It isn't sophisticated. It cost us 36 years. Now watch what's actually happening across the country in 2026. In Seattle, the Low Income Housing Institute operates or supports 18 tiny house villages across Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia, Skyway, and Tukwila, with around a dozen of them running inside Seattle city limits alone. The standard unit is 8 feet by 12 feet, insulated, wired for electricity, with an overhead light and a heater. Materials run about $4,500. Every village has a shared kitchen, laundry, showers, restrooms, a check-in house for security, and offices for case managers who work on site. Olympic Hills Village opened in the Lake City neighborhood in February with 45 units, taking individuals, couples, and people with pets. Another one is planned just off East Olive Way on Capitol Hill, 32 houses on a fenced lot with a hygiene trailer and a shared kitchen. The city has also moved to strip layers of permitting review off emergency shelters, which officials estimate could cut development timelines by 5 to 12 months. And Seattle isn't even the sharpest turnaround. Go south to San Jose, California. The city opened 11 temporary housing sites in a single year, including tiny home villages on Branham Lane, Via del Oro, and Cherry Avenue. Together, those brought nearly 1,240 new spaces online, close to tripling the city's capacity in 12 months. Unsheltered homelessness in San Jose has fallen by more than 1,000 people since 2022. In one recent stretch, San Jose recorded a 10% drop while the rest of California went up 10%. In Minneapolis, a project called Avivo Village took a warehouse and put 100 private locking dwellings inside it, which matters enormously in a city where January will kill you. Since it opened, it has served 851 people. 343 of them have moved on into permanent housing. Those aren't slogans. Those are counts. Before the objections, and before I get to what you actually do if you're the one this is happening to, one thing. I put together a guide called The Veteran's Blueprint. It lays out the paperwork, the specific programs, and the order to do them in, because the order is what decides whether somebody gets housed in 6 weeks or 6 months. Nobody hands you that sequence. You're expected to already know it, and almost nobody does until they've lost half a year finding out. If you served, or your husband did, or your son did, it's the first link in the description, right underneath this video. Now, let me be honest about the objections, because you deserve the whole picture and not a commercial. Critics call these villages sanctioned encampments, and they aren't entirely wrong to worry. The fear is that a city builds a hut village, declares victory, and quietly stops building the apartments people eventually need. A hut is not a home. It has no private bathroom, no kitchen of its own, and no lease. The people running the good villages say exactly the same thing. These are designed as a bridge. In Seattle, residents stay about 6 months on average, and that turnover is the entire point, because it means the next person off the street can move in. The second objection is cost, and this one deserves a straighter answer than the headline gives you. The hut itself is cheap. Everything around it is not. You need land, water, sewer hookups, garbage service, electricity, staff, and case managers who know how to chase down a birth certificate and a benefits application. That Capitol Hill project in Seattle carries a price tag over $1 million for 32 units, once you count all of it. Still a fraction of what an apartment building costs per bed, but nowhere close to $500 a person. Here's the part that usually gets left out, though. The $500 version never actually disappeared. It moved out of city budgets and into church parking lots, where volunteers working with donated lumber still put them up for something close to the original number. What cities are paying for isn't the hut. It's everything the hut sits on. The third objection comes from neighbors, and it deserves a straight answer rather than a lecture. People worry about crime, needles, and property values. The villages that survive politically are the ones with a fence, a security shack, a resident-run code of conduct, and a phone number a neighbor can call and reach an actual human being. The ones that fail are the ones dropped onto a block with no staff and no accountability. That's a management problem, not a moral one. So here's the practical part. If you're watching this because you're the one sliding, or because somebody you love is, this is where to put your energy. Start with coordinated entry. Almost every county in the country runs one system that assesses people and puts them in line for housing and shelter beds. In a lot of places, you reach it by dialing 211, and in some counties, you can walk into a designated access point in person. The detail that matters most is this. Your assessment date often functions as your place in line. Getting into the system early, before you're actually on the street, can matter more than anything else you do that month. Do it while you still have an address to give them. Second, protect your documents before you protect anything else. Identification card or driver's license, social security card, birth certificate, and if you served, your discharge paperwork. Almost every program in the country stalls without those, and replacing them once you're already homeless is brutally hard. Put copies with a family member, leave a set at a church, or email them to yourself so you can pull them up on a library computer. Third, if you're a veteran, say so at the very first contact. Don't wait to be asked. There are separate funding streams and separate case managers, and the doors open noticeably faster. Fourth, search for the programs in your area by their local names instead of generic terms. Depending on the city, they're called rest stops, safe spots, safe parking, enhanced shelter, or tiny house villages. The ones that allow pets, couples, and belongings are usually these, and they're usually the ones with room. Fifth, if you or somebody you know is already living in a vehicle, look specifically for safe parking programs. These are lots, often run through a church or a nonprofit, with a bathroom, overnight security, and a caseworker, where you can sleep without getting a ticket or a knock on the window at 3 in the morning. People sleeping in cars frequently don't think of themselves as homeless, so they never call anybody, and they miss the one program built exactly for them. And if you're the family member watching this, the single most useful thing you can do is make the calls. Sit next to them, dial 211 together, and write down the name of the person you spoke to and the date. That paper trail is worth more than any amount of advice. If you're on the other side of this entirely, watching because you want to help, the most useful contribution is not a bag of clothes. Community-supported shelters sells a build manual and consults with churches and nonprofits. The Mad Housers publish their blueprints for nothing. A congregation with a parking lot, a permit conversation at City Hall, and 6 people who own drills can put up shelter this year. That's the pattern that keeps repeating in every city where this actually works. Somebody with a lot said yes. Meanwhile, the deeper repair is finally starting to move. Philadelphia, Minneapolis, San Francisco, and Portland have all been working to legalize small single-room rentals again across more of their zoning districts. That's the actual fix. Not huts. Rooms with a lock and a mailing address at a price a man on Social Security can pay. The huts are the tourniquet. The rooms are the surgery. We need both, and we need them in that order, because the tourniquet goes on first. 36 years ago, on the night of November 24, 1990, the day before Thanksgiving, a group of homeless men and women pitched tents on a stretch of cold mud south of the Seattle Kingdom. Within a single weekend, 166 people were living there. Neighbors drove down and dropped off turkeys, blankets, and a Christmas tree. The mayor at the time sat down and negotiated with them instead of sending the bulldozers. 99 of them moved into an abandoned bus barn that December. The man who organized that camp reportedly could never tell the story afterward without crying, because they had voted to turn down every single offer that would have left anybody behind. That decision, made by homeless people on a cold night before Thanksgiving, is the reason this model exists at all. And we spent 3.5 decades calling it a nuisance instead of a blueprint. If you're close to the edge right now, or you're helping somebody who is, the Veterans Blueprint is the first link in the description below. Get it tonight, while you're still thinking about it. I cover housing, benefits, and the programs people qualify for and never get told about every week, so subscribe if that's useful to you.